Did you know that a lot of digestive issues are caused by a potential toxin that's in all of the quote healthy foods that scientists have been telling us to eat with a fraudulent food pyramid for the longest time? Warning signs include weight gain and fatigue, digestive discomfort and stiff joints, even skin problems. Well, Dr. Gundry, a world-renowned cardiologist, explains these side effects are often mistaken for normal signs of aging because digestive issues develop usually over a matter of years and sometimes even decades. He says the damage is probably caused by these health foods and it's far from normal. The good news is you can easily help fix the problem from your own home. It's very simple. You just have to know which foods are actually healthy and which contain this hidden potential toxin. So you can go find this yourself at gutcleanseprotocol.com/inspired. Because after years of research, Dr. Gundry has decided to release an informative video to the public, free and uninterrupted, showcasing exactly which foods you need to avoid. Go find that video at gutcleanseprotocol.com/inspired or click on the link in the video description below. Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. It's Jean Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another Inspired live stream. It is Friday, February 9, 2024. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're whole, we're free. Hell, we might even be winning. Yesterday was I would say probably a monumental day on a world stage. There's one thing that I have always enjoyed doing is and I'm always called to this at certain times, and then I'm called to step away, but to interpret or look at the signals that are being sent through the media, through politics, politicians. Usually it's quite boring for the most part, but yesterday was a monumental day, and it wasn't just a Tucker Putin interview. It was a timing of many things that unfolded throughout the day. And I'm going to go through it. I created a timeline of interesting things that happened during the day that I believe we should look at. What I believe these things might mean, why I think there's something positive inside here, and why I think quite a few people might have missed the significance of these events yesterday and why they unfolded all in one day. One thing is clear. A lot of people yesterday were orchestrating a ping pong match of signals back and forth. That's not to say that there isn't a bigger hand behind the scenes manipulating everything. That's always should always be assumed. But let's look at the events of yesterday. Beyond just the interview, we'll go into the interview a little more. I did my analysis yesterday. I refrained from looking at what anybody else has said until now. So I didn't go and went to look for opinions, analysis. I wanted to keep my thoughts clear, and I'll look at them later. So here's the timeline of yesterday. Let's look at it together, and welcome everybody in the live chat on Rumble, on X, and here on YouTube. It's good to see you all. Okay, so, and I'm going to put my glasses on for this because small font. Okay, so yesterday, February 8th, we're going to look at that day, a big day on the world stage, huge day. Ukraine Zelensky sacked Zaluzny, who was the commander-in-chief of the country's armed forces, so the highest-ranking military. And this is significant because there was talk about this over the last 10 days. Basically, it was leaked to the media that Zelensky had asked Zaluzny to resign. He refused. He enjoys the support of the people, I believe, had enjoyed the support of the Western Alliance. And then sort of what happened was, the CIA and all the others came in and said, what the hell are you doing, Zelensky? You should talk this over with all of us here. And so about 10 days later, yesterday, he was sacked, but today he was declared, he got, I think, the highest award for being the hero of the Ukraine. And there was sort of a campaign to phase him out, I think, gracefully. But this was the first huge signal of today, okay? So the highest-ranking military officer in this war was sacked yesterday by Zelensky. Second sign, it's announced again, and this is going to make more sense as we go through this. Joe Biden mistakes dead politician with living one for second time this week. Now, This kind of news, unfortunately, doesn't shock anyone. And of course, it's not a misstep, a mishap. This is what we've been seeing for years and years, just incoherent mumbling by the resident. But that was reported. Okay, so then let's go to the next thing. Yesterday, too, the report by the special counsel who was investigating Biden's mishandling of classified documents before he was president, so no presidential act, no nothing like that. The report was released, and the report said there were some really staggering things in there. Again, not surprising only that they would be put out yesterday when everybody knew the interview was coming up that night. So I'm looking at timing here. Why would they release that on the day of the Putin interview? And here's what was said in the report. Biden willfully retained and disclosed highly classified material when he was a private citizen, but no criminal charges are warranted, says special counsel. This is classic, but we'll get into that. Again, more. Special counsel also says Biden came across to investigator as an elderly man with a poor memory. Okay, so this is signal, not noise, like famous Bannon always says, right? Elderly man with a poor memory. Well, I guess we all kind of caught on to that. And here's a little bit of quoting from that special report. Don't trust me. It's not boring. It's all going to make sense. In his interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended. If it was 2013, when did I stop being vice president? So he's being quoted. And forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term began. It's really interesting. Those are kind of monumental things that a healthy person remembers. When did I begin being vice president of the United States? I think I should remember the year. Okay. He did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died. Okay. I have never met a parent who lost a child who does not know the time, the date, where they were, exactly when they got the news, how it happened. It's burnt into your memory. If you're healthy, you know this. There's no doubt about it, okay? So, and here's the conclusion of the special report, again, looking into Biden's handling of classified documents when he was not president. We have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury as he did during our interview of him. Very important, as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. So this interview was conducted while he was president last October. Very important that we know that. Based on our direct interactions with and observations of him, he is someone for whom many jurors will want to identify reasonable doubt. It would be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires mental state of willingness. Basically, forget the classified documents, forget everything else. What this was about was signaling that official sources, the DOJ, okay, is basically signaling that the 25th Amendment might apply here. Biden is not capable, if he's not capable of standing trial, or he's not capable of remembering when his son died or when he was vice president, then he certainly isn't capable of being the leader of a nation. And there's a lot of question marks around that anyways, okay? Moving forward. Then the House Speaker, Johnson, comes out and says a man too incapable of being held accountable for mishandling classified information is certainly unfit for the Oval Office. Well, that's a duh. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, right? So then that's all happening within a few hours, minutes here. Yesterday, Trump comes out and gives this short little statement here where he says the world is in tremendous danger. We're in danger of possibly a World War III. And we have a man who's absolutely the worst president in the history of our country. Forget the hyperbole. Forget that. The signal is, okay? The signal is, so Trump steps up, again, all in one day, right before, a few hours before the interview with Tucker and Putin, steps out and says these things. There is a lot of signals going around, right? From the Ukraine, the general the general in charge of the forces, of the armed forces fighting that war, is fired. All this Biden stuff comes out about his mental capability. This is really the signal here. Trump steps in, says, here's what the dangers are. We have an incapable man at the helm. Okay, so moving forward, I'm just saying what was happening. Then we have the interview, and I broke it down yesterday night after the interview. I watched the full 2 hours. There's a lot in that interview to unpack, and I'll get into the interview in a little bit here. So then the interview happens at 6 p.m. Eastern time. The interview goes for 2 hours and 7 minutes. However, during the interview, I get a notification that Biden will give remarks from the White House at 7:45 p.m. Eastern time, so an hour and 45 minutes into the interview. Here's the interesting thing about this timing. This means they chose an extremely visible moment on social media, because by now hundreds of millions of people are already seen. At that time, tens of millions of people have already seen the Carlson Putin interview, and they were watching it. So the world's media attention was here. The social media attention of the people, everything was glued on this event. So if you say Biden's going to come out just right after or at the end of this event, you are saying we want him to be seen during this time. We want him to be highly visible. Otherwise, you schedule it at a different time. They scheduled it at 7:45 p.m., an unscripted Q&A, which is unusual for him. And of course, what was revealed in this unscripted Q&A that he essentially isn't capable of even getting the most basic facts right, as he called the Egyptian president, the Mexican president. There was confusion, there was stumbling, mumbling, and all that. So this was what had transpired yesterday. And I might have missed a few events, but these are some of the most important events that transpired yesterday. Now, why does this matter? Let's say it this way. Here's my opinion on what transpired yesterday. Yesterday was a ping pong match of messages. And at the end of the day, the signal from the United States was, or whoever runs the show was, we have initiated the removal of the general in Ukraine, and we're signaling that we're removing Biden one way or another, whether 25th Amendment or he's going to be phased out. He's not going to be the candidate for the next for the upcoming election. In my opinion, yesterday both sides on the world stage opened the door a little bit. That was what I saw. During the interview, there were a lot of interesting things to unpack here, a lot, and I did to a certain extent yesterday. I was first and foremost, you have to know that in a conversation, almost 90% is body language, okay? So if you're looking at the interview between Tucker and Putin, and with all due respect to Tucker, because this is the biggest deal he's ever done, in my view. Not that interviewing U.S. presidents isn't a big deal, but to go to a foe, to an enemy nation, and interview that president, that is a big deal. And it took him at least an hour to get into it, really, to become more of Tucker. I think he approached it from a typical, like how he would approach an interview with Americans. It was very like, okay, let's get to the bullet points. Let's push this out. And Putin did what is sort of a Slavic tradition, if you will, and a tradition more Eastern European. Let's give context, history. Let's give a broader perspective here. Let's not just spar, right? Let's have a conversation. And he ran that show. He ran that show pretty much out the full interview. It's not that he didn't want to answer questions, but he basically ran the pace of the interview, which was to be expected. There are very few people I could think of in the world today that could go and have an eye-to-eye in terms of equal conversation with Putin just because the man is extremely knowledgeable and intelligent. There's no doubt about it. Extremely knowledgeable and intelligent, surpasses any Western leader I could think of today by a long shot, right? So kudos to Tucker, but it was clear that he was out of his league. And it's a good thing, right? Because we all constantly learn. And frankly, I wouldn't have, I mean, I would, of course I would interview Putin, don't get me wrong, but I didn't necessarily envy him because of the timing, because of the significance and whatnot. There were some diplomacy exchange there. There were a few points in interview that I felt were specifically there to send signals. Now, the main signal for me was, listen, this is from Russia's perspective. Listen, we didn't start this conflict. Everybody thinks we did. Here's our culture. Here's our history. We're an old nation. We are an established nation. We have an established culture. Here's the history of the Ukraine. Here's the context between our nations. Here's what it all means. You need to know these things before you come out guns blazing thinking that you can accuse us of something. However, here we are. Again, I'm just analyzing and kind of trying to figure out what Putin was thinking. Here we are. We are in this conflict. And we can fight this till the end. That's no problem for us. We're doing very well. Our military capabilities are far beyond yours. That's what he said. And so, but we'd rather not, honestly. We'd rather get back to the table and talk, but the ball is in your corner, okay? So this is my interpretation, this is the message. So then they sent out Biden at 7:45 p.m. Eastern, which was the answer. Okay, here's our second answer of the day. We sacked the general and we're sacking Biden. This was what was at least the signal. That's for the people who are watching. That's for the people who are analyzing. Whether something else is going on behind the scenes, how would I know? I don't know. And for those who pretend they know what the deeper meaning is, we can all only speculate because we're not in these conversations. From a body language standpoint, again, I saw Putin being more confident. He was very confident, but I've seen him even more confident than yesterday. There was a sort of during the end or towards the end of the conversation, and this is what was really interesting. Tucker had pretty much already ended the interview with a short, "Thank you, Mr. President." And Putin then went on and continued to explain certain things, which meant to me he really wanted to get a point across. Usually, the interviewer, unless there is some hostility going on, the interviewer will at some point end the conversation and say, "Okay, thank you, and let's go." It wasn't the case. Putin wanted it to go longer. So everything that was said after that point, I think, is highly significant. And really, the signal was, once again, we want to talk. We want to negotiate. I thought that was very significant. He made remarks about the CIA and Tucker's family ties and how Tucker had wanted to go into the CIA and thankfully wasn't accepted. There was some interesting sort of old spook speak there. I thought that was pretty interesting. The way he talked about Elon Musk was very interesting, by the way, Putin. It was sort of like the United States will have to find a way to come to an agreement with Elon Musk. It was almost like Musk is very, 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 very powerful, and the United States will have to come to an agreement with him, sort of like that. It was very interesting how he phrased that. He referred to the United States as the master of propaganda and the quasi-owner of most of the media companies in the world, which is also very interesting. I mean, he basically, he said, well, we don't have these capabilities in terms of propaganda. I mean, they do. Of course they do. It's freaking Russia. It's the biggest country in the world. So, and he is, that man is so experienced, right? He was a spook. He's been the leader of Russia for freaking 25 years. Whichever way you slice it, he knows exactly what he says and why he says it and when he says it. So there's no doubt about that. I think, as I said before, perhaps a lot of American viewers who didn't get the opportunity until now, and probably a lot of European viewers too, will finally come to the conclusion that the world is dealing with an extremely intelligent, knowledgeable, and at least in the public arena, the way he presents himself, quite reasonable. I'm not saying that's the man that they face at the negotiating table. I don't know that, but he's presenting himself as always kind of reasonable. Okay, let's talk about this. It was very clear that he is butthurt. Putin is butthurt very clearly because he wasn't accepted, or Russia wasn't accepted into, in the early years after the fall of the Soviet Union. Basically, I think the promises that were made, if the Soviet Union falls, weren't kept. He said it could have been a lot more peaceful had we done things together rather than against each other. But then again, think about it. One of the big reasons for NATO to exist was a power like Russia. So if you have a power like Russia in NATO, who's going to be the boogeyman? There's not many left. There are some, but I think, in my opinion, if the willingness was there, something wonderful could happen. As far as I can tell, Putin made it clear that the forces behind the scenes did not want one thing to happen: for Russia and the United States to become true friends. That was never supposed to happen. And open communication was never supposed to happen. This was prevented at all costs. And we have seen this with the establishment politicians, the Clintons and the John Kerrys and all the others, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they were all towing the same line. We can't be friends with someone like Putin in Russia. However, I believe that if the forces behind the scenes think this is the worst thing that could happen, then that's the thing that should happen. And as I've said before, I think the Russian people, the American people, have much more in common than what divides them. And I think we all should be friends. I think I have no beef with any particular people in the world. And I think most of you don't have either. So I think this is something that after yesterday, there's a huge chance for this. And I do believe that there are multiple levels of the power structure. And when people say, well, essentially the same forces who control the United States also fully control Putin, it's all just a game. It's way more nuanced and complex than that. And just because there is some alignment on certain subjects doesn't mean there is alignment on all subjects. And you are definitely discounting the power of egos here. You're discounting the power of personal interests. You're discounting so many things that need to be counted in. Cultural background, religion, upbringing, programming, all of these things matter. And unless someone is 100% a Manchurian candidate and 100% mind controlled, then you don't have 100% control. And things can shift and interests can change. Clearly, Putin sent a message to also the people of the United States, which was, the world is changing and it's changing rapidly. And you need to see and accept that and do your part to become part of the change. I won't say positive change. I can't say that. He made it clear that the BRICS nations economically have become much stronger than G7. That in terms of currency, the BRICS nation, for now the yuan, the ruble, and whatnot, are going to surpass the dollar in terms of trade volume, which is, by the way, the end for the U.S. economy unless there's a massive shift, because that's what it's based on. The United States economy is based on the dollar being the currency, the reserve currency for the world, and the currency in which all major trades deals are happen. And that's not the case anymore. That's what was said yesterday. Dollar is losing the standing in the world, and with that, that's the foundation for the U.S. economy. That's why this nation can be at 140% GDP debt to GDP ratio, at 34 trillion debt. Certain things couldn't have happened if the dollar wasn't the dominant currency in the world, which is not. It's not anymore. Let me go a little bit through the notes here. a big thing I didn't mention yesterday. Putin talked a lot about the whys of Ukraine, the historic context, what's really happening there. But he said one major issue, and if that's not addressed, whether on the battlefield or at the peace table, is the denazification. This was interesting. Putin said that Ukraine has a huge Nazi presence in powerful positions. And he also accused the Western alliance of supporting the Nazis in Ukraine because they're antagonizing Russia. And so he said that's a deal breaker if we can't agree on outlawing the Nazis in Ukraine and the ethnic killings that they have engaged in. And since, you know, how these same groups have been associated and supported Hitler when Hitler came into the Ukraine and whatnot. So that was a big piece of the conversation too. The denazification, interesting, because of course in the Western media, there's no talk about that. You're not allowed to say that that's even a thing. But of course, history and the facts show that it is a thing. And that was sort of that was one of the big things. We need to agree on that. And as Tucker said after the interview, there's sort of this expectation that if there's going to be another negotiation, that part of the deal will have to be for Putin to give up Crimea. And that's, like Tucker said, that's laughable. It's never going to happen. Crimea is a Russian region. It was technically part of the Ukraine until 2014, but it is a Russian speaking. It's Russian people. They had a referendum. They wanted to be with Russia. It is one of the most important military ports for the Russians, has been for a very, very long time. So that's not going to happen. And that was never going to happen. But all in all, I view this as very positive. There was also sort of I'm missing that part from others in the world. There was a understanding about the significance of the development in AI and genetics, and basically how horrific the effects can and will be if, at least in his words, Putin says, if there's not an international agreement on how we use this. He kind of compared this to nuclear weapons. I want to say that this was good for all people to watch. It would be great if everybody watched this 2-hour interview and just see a different perspective, maybe a different way of thinking, maybe a little bit of a deeper way of thinking, in all honesty. And this is not in support of anyone, because that's not what this is about. But if we're gonna talk about a country like Russia, the biggest country in the world, constantly demonize it, and have been demonizing it for the longest time, not understanding anything about its culture, its way of thinking, about the historic significance of Russia, about the incredible culture that's there. And as I've always said, this is the door to friendship, is understanding each other better, getting to know each other better. And maybe when people listen to this interview, they'll go and do some research on their own and try to find out more about the true history of Russia, the Rus, the culture, the thinking of the people, and how they've been propagandized and how they've been programmed into hating something they have no knowledge about, no real knowledge. All the people in the Western world learned about Russia as, well, there were the barbarians, and then there were the Tsars, and then there were the Bolsheviks. And, you know, it's all just these bullet points that really never go into the depths of the complexity and also beauty of the Russian culture. I'm all for a world where every nation is deeply patriotic, nationalist, in the way that it really aims to create the best possible conditions for its people, and to be able to sustain itself, and then have great friendships with all the other nations. That's, you know, that's really the simplicity of it, because there are things in the world where every nation kind of needs to get together and agree on how we're going to handle this. And that should happen, right? Those things that concern everybody. And then there's things that really should remain within a nation. So all of this, right, is an invitation for people to dig deeper. But yesterday was probably one of the biggest days on the world stage that I've seen in a long time. A lot of signals. Now we're going to see how this plays out. Maybe my wish is stronger here than anything else, but I wish that we're going to see an end to hostilities and killings. Because whatever happens, and there are times when war seems to be inevitable, but when women, children, the elderly are killed and die, there's absolutely no justification for things like that. There's no, you know, the ends justify the means here. That just needs to stop. Let me see if I missed anything important about that. Cool heads. Definitely cool heads. That's what we need. Definitely moving forward. One last important piece about what Putin said about World War III, about the potential of nuclear war, I thought was very level-headed when he said, why would someone talk like that? He thinks it's a fear tactic of the Western alliance of NATO, that everybody knows it's a non-starter, that using certain kinds of weapons simply means annihilation on all sides, and that what reasonable, logically thinking person would ever suggest that? And I think, in essence, there were a lot of times when he sort of kind of said, if you think it through, if you use your logic and your common sense, then you understand why this can't be true, and this it shouldn't be done. And I think we have lost this a lot in our media culture. As I said, when American and now also a lot of European politicians come on the screen, it's all just hyperbole. It's all just propaganda. There's no substance. There's no deeper thinking. There's no reasoning. There's no common sense. There's no logic. And that's what's missing from the equation. And then we need to bring that back. All right, my friends. Again, I think it was a big day, February 8th. Kind of mark that in the calendars, and remember what happened yesterday, because that might make us understand or help us understand better what's about to happen. The way I see it, there's only two ways from here. Either the fight goes into a very dark phase. However, there's no support from the Europeans or the American people. They don't want to send more money. They don't want to send more equipment. They don't want to send more weapons. The politicians, the people licking the elites' behinds, they are the only ones who want that. The people don't want that. So there's no support for this war, which leads me to the probable option. You're going to sit down. Ukraine is going to look, when it does settle, it's going to look different. I would assume that it's the Russian parts will go to Russia, and the other parts will remain with Ukraine. I would assume that's how it kind of plays out. And there must be, part of this deal must be an agreement as to pushing back the borders of NATO. Otherwise, or opening the door to bringing Russia in. My preferred version would be the dissolvement of NATO and the EU and the UN and the WHO with that. Most of these organizations. Let's start fresh. All right, Inspire Tribe. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love you. We appreciate you. We'll be back with you again very, very soon.